My parents suddenly came back into my life when someone lied to them that I had married a rich boss. So I played along and taught them a lesson. I am 27. I work as a financial consultant in a large company. I have not spoken to my parents for 8 years. I have an older sister, Celeste, who is 34. She is happily married and has 2 children. We communicate occasionally, but we are not close sisters. When I was 19, there was an incident after which I cut off contact with my parents forever. The thing is, my parents are staunch Catholics. They take their faith extremely seriously. Since childhood, my sister and I were expected to strictly follow religious canons and live a life based entirely on these values. Instead of sending us to regular schools, they decided to homeschool us. In their opinion, the local schools did not sufficiently meet their views, so they took our education into their own hands. Our parents had a clear picture of our future, and they put enormous pressure on us to choose one of 2 paths, either to become mothers of many children or to enter a monastery. In their options, only these, in their opinion, were in line with the traditions of their community and were acceptable to us. My sister, who is 7 years older than me, never dated, lived at home until her wedding, seldom left our neighborhood more than 15 kilometers, and hardly participated in the life of the local community. It is not surprising that she was their favorite. When she was 22, her parents arranged for her to marry Aminia, the son of a friend of her father. At the wedding, they found fault with everything, from the text of the readings to the order of the Mass. Even though she was led by an ordained minister, fortunately for my sister, Matthew turned out to be a great guy, and Celeste has a good life and wonderful children. Seeing my sister married off at such a young age made me realize I wanted a different life for myself. She may have been happy with it, but I was not going to follow the traditional path. I was a young woman full of dreams, ambition, and a passion for independence. I wanted to build a career, to travel, to see the world. My vision of life was in direct conflict with what my parents thought was right. After high school, I was eager to go to college, and despite their categorical no, I applied to one of the best colleges in the area and was thrilled to be awarded a full scholarship. Well, when I told my parents, they were furious. My father was hysterical. He was screaming. His words were full of condemnation and disappointment. My mother simply refused to look at me. They could not understand why I needed to study. After all, in their opinion, I should have focused on following the plan they had laid out. It was a difficult moment to see how the people closest to me so furiously rejected my dream of an education. The consequences of that argument were serious. It became the beginning of an ever-widening gap between me and my parents for many years. It was obvious that my dreams did not coincide at all with their idea of what my life should be like. That moment became the starting point of our complete estrangement. Going to college opened up a whole new world for me. I learned things that challenged the beliefs that had been beaten into me since childhood. I made new friends and felt an independence that I had never experienced before. But my parents had a hard time handling these changes. They perceived my independence and college influence as a threat to their values. Every meeting during the holidays was tense and fraught with misunderstandings. I felt like I was walking through a minefield, avoiding any topics that could lead to another quarrel. The gap between our views only grew, and it became increasingly difficult to find a common language. Despite all this, part of me still craved their approval, but it remained an elusive dream. After graduating from college, I was excited about the prospect of finding a job. I told my parents about my desire to build a career and soon move out of their house to follow my dreams. But they were not pleased. They did not want me to follow this path. They continued to insist that I get married and have children in accordance with their beliefs. Our arguments became increasingly bitter, emotions ran high, and they desperately tried to persuade me to reconsider my decisions. When I refused to comply, they ordered me to leave their house immediately. I was shocked and appalled by how harshly and angrily they reacted to a decision that had brought me so much joy. I packed up my things and moved in with my sister, where I lived for several months until I found my own place. Then I promised myself never to return to my parents' house again. I wanted to live by my own rules and achieve success and happiness outside of their traditional expectations. My decision to leave and build a career deeply hurt my parents. In response, they completely stopped communicating with me. Since then, when I talked to my sister, I did not specifically ask her about her parents, and she did not tell me anything about them either. Now, let's move on to the story itself. I had been dating my boyfriend for 3 years, and 3 months ago, he proposed to me. We decided to have a simple registration at the Zax, and then celebrate with a modest dinner with close friends. I don't like lavish, pompous weddings, and the fact that I couldn't invite my family was another reason to do everything as modestly as possible. Everything in my life seemed to be going smoothly until I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, and it was my parents on the other end. After so many years of silence, I couldn't believe it was them. It turned out that they had found out about my wedding and wanted to congratulate me. I thanked them reservedly, but inside I was raging with emotion. They continued to ask how I was doing, and I answered without much enthusiasm. Everything was fine until they started asking how it was to be married to a man who held such a high position in my company. Confused, I asked them again what they meant, and then they happily explained that they were happy. They said that I had married my boss. My jaw almost dropped. I couldn't understand where they got such thoughts from. They said that someone they knew told them about it, and they were very happy for me. I remained silent almost the entire time. While they chatted incessantly about how proud they were of me that I had finally gotten married, my father was delighted with the idea of meeting my husband and getting to know him better. My mother immediately asked if I was now going to quit my job to focus on the children and my husband's happiness. Their suggestions stunned me. It gradually dawned on me that the only reason they had suddenly decided to contact me after 8 years was because they believed that I had married the boss, which in their eyes seemed to increase my social status. And now they expected me to become a model wife. Their condescending tone and expectations infuriated me, but I decided to play along. I painted a picture of life for them that was partly true. My husband and I do have a comfortable life, but I added a bunch of lies. Like we have 20 housekeepers, a huge mansion with a swimming pool, and all that jazz. My parents hung on every word, and their excitement only grew, especially when they began begging me to arrange a meeting with my rich husband. Their enthusiasm was pathetic because their entire desire to reconnect with me was based solely on the lie that I had married the boss. As I played along and agreed to arrange a meeting for the weekend, a plan began to form in my head. I wanted to teach them a lesson, to make them realize how much pain they had caused me by rejecting me just because I did not live up to their expectations. And now they suddenly wanted to come back into my life, but only for the sake of bragging to their friends from the parish. It was bittersweet, and I was determined to show them the consequences of their actions. I talked to my husband about my plan, but he was hesitant. He understood why I had lied, but he was unsure if he should start his acquaintance with my parents by lying. After all, it was their first meeting. After some persuasion, he finally agreed to participate in this show. I also approached my boss. Yes, my boss was a woman. Over the years that I worked for the company, we had become good friends. I explained the situation to her, and she was very amused by what was happening to my parents. I asked if I could use her house for a day, and she readily agreed. I sent my parents the address and set up the meeting they had so requested. On the day of the meeting, my parents arrived at the house, convinced that they were going to meet my rich boss, whom I had supposedly married. Their eyes widened in surprise when they saw the size of the house and the huge lawn. My husband and I met them at the entrance. My father shook my husband's hand with such vigor that it seemed as if he wanted to rip it off. My mother hugged me and congratulated me on the marriage. Although my husband was hesitant at first, he played his role perfectly. He greeted my parents with a smile, made casual conversation, and pretended to be the rich boss they thought he was. We sat down at the table, and my parents immediately noticed the servants who were serving us food. My father began to pepper my husband with questions about the house, his assets, and how I had ever managed to get a man of his caliber. Even though I was irritated by the whole interrogative atmosphere, my husband, in order to maintain his image, made up a whole fairy tale about his wealth, his career path, and how we had met. It was all part of our carefully thought-out game. In the midst of our conversation, my father, unable to bear it, leaned forward, his eyes shining, and asked, "You know, I've always wanted to see a classic car collection. Do you happen to have a few vintage cars I could look at?" Maybe he played along and said that. Yes, he did have a few, and they both went to look at my rich husband's car collection, which actually belonged to my boss. Meanwhile, my mother lingered inside, came up to me, and, lowering her voice, admitted, "You know, we're so glad you married a rich man because we're having trouble paying our mortgage," she said anxiously. "We're afraid we might lose our house." I froze, looking at her, completely stunned. And she continued, "Mo, since I'm now married to a rich husband, living in a mansion with vintage cars and a bunch of servants, I might as well talk him into helping them with the payments." It was like an electric shock had struck me. The only reason my parents had decided to get in touch with me after all these years was their hope of taking advantage of my husband's wealth. They never cared about me. It was a hard realization, and a storm of emotions swirled inside me as I waited for my father and husband to return. Tension hung in the air. When they finally returned, I took a deep breath and decided, it's time to have a frank conversation. I turned to my father and asked him point blank, "Is what my mother said true?" He hesitated for a moment, and then replied, "But, to be honest, I didn't expect you to get married at all, especially to a rich man. And now that your husband has everything, it wouldn't hurt if he shared a little of it with us." My husband and I were shocked by these words. My father continued, explaining that he really didn't have money for a mortgage, and he couldn't ask his friends for help. It would hurt his reputation. Seeing my parents' despair and their conviction that they could easily profit from my husband's imaginary wealth, I decided to take my revenge to the end. With a mischievous sparkle in my eyes, I looked at my father and said, "You know what, Dad? We can help you with the mortgage, but there is one condition. You must first publicly apologize to me and admit that you were wrong to stop communicating with me 8 years ago. And you must do this in front of all your family and friends at a meeting that we are organizing." The parents were taken aback, but they had little choice. They reluctantly agreed to my terms. Over the next weeks, I held a family gathering, inviting relatives and close friends. My sister did not know all the circumstances and was completely perplexed as to why my parents had suddenly decided to get in touch with me. After so many years, I had deliberately kept her from my plan, knowing that her moral principles might get the better of her and she would spill the beans to her parents. On the day of the event, I was pleased to meet my large family after so many years and to get to know my parents' old friends. Everyone vied with each other to congratulate me on my marriage, on my supposedly rich boss, and kept asking when we would have children. I was beginning to get irritated by their pointed questions, but to keep up appearances, I smiled politely and answered everything without complaint. Amidst the general excitement, my father decided to draw attention to himself in order to make a toast. He stood up, raised his glass, and began by talking about how happy he was to be among his family and friends. He congratulated my husband and me on our marriage. Then my father continued his speech, expressing his pride in how I had supposedly changed my life by marrying my boss. He began talking about how ashamed he had been when I had announced my desire to pursue a career and how he felt I had brought shame on the family. He concluded by announcing that he now forgave me, because I had finally chosen the path he and my mother had always dreamed of. Silence fell over the room. His words rang in the air, and my father had no idea that this evening would take a completely different turn, one for which he was clearly not prepared. When he finished his speech, there was a respectful, tense pause in the room. Most of the guests were sure that I would stand up to thank him, but I had other intentions. It was time to reveal the true purpose of this event and finally speak out loud about the 8-year gap. When all eyes turned to me, I started to say, "Thank you, Dad, for your kind words and for being here today, but I have to confess something." A murmur ran through the room. "Yes, I am married," I continued, "but he's not my boss. My boss is a woman, and, by the way, a very close friend of mine. It was her house you saw earlier. All this wealth, luxurious life, it was a stage performance. Someone lied to you, told you that I married the boss, and I decided to play along to find out what you really wanted from me. That's why I insisted on this meeting today, to tell you the truth about our family. My father's expression changed from proud to shocked. The room fell silent. I told them all in front of everyone how my parents cut off contact with me for 8 years just because they didn't like my desire for independence and career. But suddenly, as soon as they believed that I allegedly married my boss with a lot of money, they immediately called. I revealed the real reason for their call. They needed financial help because they could not pay their house. They got in touch after so many years with one goal in mind: to ride on my rich husband's neck and persuade me to ask him to pay their debts. It was a shocking confession. While everyone was digesting what they heard, I continued. Even though I did not marry my boss, as they thought, my husband and I do have a very comfortable life, and we both have high-paying jobs. I emphasized that this prosperity was the result of my breaking free from my parents' control and going my own way, choosing a career over a hasty marriage and motherhood. The room was filled with mixed emotions, from surprise and disbelief to understanding and even disappointment. All eyes turned to my parents, who now looked humiliated and exposed. The guests began to exchange glances and whisper among themselves, until my husband and I rose from the table and left the house with a sense of accomplishment. There was a sense of satisfaction in my soul. I had finally put an end to the falsehood that my parents had been playing in front of their community for so long. It all happened last week, and the consequences were quite telling. Since then, I have been receiving many calls from people. Most people support and admire my courage, saying that I stood up for myself and told the truth in front of everyone. But my sister and some relatives think that I went too far by humiliating my parents in public. So I did wrong by playing along with their lies about being married to the boss just to get my final revenge on them. So I suggest that we pause this video right now and answer the author's question in the comments. Personally, I can't judge whether the author did the right thing or not, but she certainly had the right to do such a thing. Yes, she publicly humiliated her parents in front of their community, but wait a minute, her parents had also humiliated her in front of everyone they knew. Moreover, in fact, her parents publicly humiliated her in front of the same community, even at the same evening. So, I believe that the author is absolutely not at fault here. And now let's move on to the update. Update 1. Thank you all for your responses to my post. After I read your comments and advice, I wanted to call my sister and share my point of view. I explained to her that I was only 19 when my parents kicked me out of the house, and how the trauma had left deep emotional scars for years. Their decision to cut ties with me was based solely on my desire to pursue higher education and live a different life than they wanted. It was incredibly painful. I made it clear that I had never judged her for choosing marriage. It was just not my path. I told her how hurt I had been when I realized the real reason my parents wanted to contact me after all these years. I asked Celeste if she could ever do the same to her children, to turn her back on them if they made the wrong choice. She answered seriously, no. I pointed out that as a mother, she should understand how terrible it was what our parents did to me. That's why I felt the need to teach them a lesson they won't forget. After hearing my side, my sister expressed sympathy for what I was going through. I always kept my feelings to myself, and she never realized the full extent of my internal conflict. Celeste admitted that she had no idea how hard it had been for me all these years. Now she understood why I had acted the way I had. Although she cannot fully justify my revenge, she promised that she would not hold a grudge against me. After that conversation, I felt better. As for my parents, they have not contacted me since then, and I had no intention of making the first move either. Considering how harshly I exposed them, I can only imagine how angry they are now. Time will tell whether they will reflect on their actions and whether they will want to restore our broken relationship, or whether they will simply continue to blame me for everything. For now, I'm sticking to my guns. I did what I thought was right, and I hope they learned their lesson. Today, Mom called me while I was at work. She said that she and Dad felt humiliated in front of everyone, and that Dad was still mad at me. She continued to chide me for lying, but I reminded her that I had only played along in order to expose their true intentions. Mom tried to justify herself by saying that they really believed that I was finally going to become a good girl, give up my career, and devote myself to my family. I made it clear that I was not going to do that, especially now that I was financially stable and had a promotion. In store, I reiterated that I had no regrets because all it had done was expose the true nature of my parents. Mom also told me that some of our relatives and friends were now discussing this situation. Some of them had told them directly that what they did to me 8 years ago was terrible. This, she said, made my father even more furious. I did not want to continue this conversation because I knew it would lead to nothing, so I simply hung up. I did not want to have this fruitless dialogue in the middle of the workday. My parents were stuck in their beliefs, and I was stuck in mine. But I was pleased that thanks to my confession, the ice had broken not only within our family, but also among everyone who was aware of what was happening. Update 2. It's been 3 months since the last update, and a lot has changed in that time. After listening to the advice of many of you, I decided to start therapy. I realized that all these years I've been dealing with my parents' detachment incorrectly, and that the old resentment was weighing heavily on me. Yes, I had uncovered the truth about my parents' motives, but I did not want to continue to live clinging to this resentment. Therapy was a step toward a healthier way of working through the past and my own feelings. My parents agreed to sit down at the negotiating table, mainly due to my sister's sincere requests. At first, I was hesitant about agreeing to this, but my husband convinced me to give them a chance. We all gathered at my sister's house, and I chose to remain silent until my parents started the conversation. My mother spoke first, expressing regret for all our previous fights, which really surprised me. She admitted that during this time, she had rethought a lot and realized how much their actions had hurt me. Now she understood how much pain they had caused me. My father, who had been silent until then, admitted that cutting off communication for 8 years had been a mistake and that they wanted to make things right. He explained that their commitment to their beliefs had prevented them from seeing the situation from my side. I, on the other hand, had listened more than spoken. Their words sounded sincere, and it was a positive start to the conversation. My parents told me that they had sought advice from people in their community, and this had helped them look at everything in a new way. Even though it wasn't easy, I knew it was the first step towards some kind of reconciliation. My sister was clearly relieved by the way the conversation was going. She hardly said anything, but she was there supporting us. You could tell how much she hoped for the connection between me and my parents to be restored. It was encouraging to see her optimism. Maybe, with time and our efforts, our family really could heal and reconnect. I will continue to go to therapy and remain open to the possibility of reconciliation with my parents, but I will approach it with caution. For those who are wondering, everything is great with my husband. Our marriage brings nothing but joy, and he always supports my decisions. I am truly lucky with my partner. We're not thinking about children yet, but we do not rule out such a possibility in the future. For now, we are just enjoying life and traveling the world together. Well, that is all for now. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Watch our previous video, which you will see here, and good luck to you.